are you all? Good.
Thank you, Valerie, for being here. I think I should set the record straight. We did not coordinate wardrobes. We just sort of are simpatico and kind of think alike, as sort of what happens over the years. Valerie, on behalf of 1,600 or so Chicago women and a few brave men, thank you so much, and welcome home to Chicago.
Oh, there's no place like home. Thank you. Thank you.
I want you all to know that this was the first speaking engagement that Valerie accepted for post-White House. So again, thank you, and we're thrilled to have you here.
Well, I can't even remember how many years I was a member of the network, more than I care to recount. So of course, this was the first place I wanted to commit to come back and speak.
I thought I would start the conversation with the creation story, which Kate alluded to. So could you tell us about that dinner with Michelle Robinson and Barack Obama, and what was significant for you about that dinner? What did you learn?
Well, first I'll just go back a little bit to how the dinner came about. So Susan did send me then Michelle Robinson's resume, and she said, outstanding credentials, powerhouse, just lighting Sidley Austin on fire, but doesn't want to be at a big law firm. I said, that's my kind of person. I want to meet her. And so I interviewed her, and it was about a 20-minute interview scheduled. And I would say about 15 minutes in, I realized that I was no longer interviewing her. She was interviewing me. And after about an hour and a half, I was so impressed. I said, well, we'd love to have you. And I gave her a job offer, which I actually had no authority to do because I hadn't talked to my boss. So being the wise soul that she is, she said, well, let me think about it. So a few days later, I said, well, isn't that enough time? Have you thought about it? And she said, well, I have some bad news for you. My fiance thinks it's a pretty dreadful idea. I said, well, who's your fiance? And she said his name is Barack Obama, and he began his career as a community organizer, and he's used to rallying against city government for not doing what it should do, and so he's concerned that if I'm in the mayor's office, maybe he would be rallying against me. And long story short, he'd like to meet the person who is going to be looking out for me in the job. So would you have dinner with us? And so I said, sure. Good decision. So we had dinner, and I will tell you, Susan, I remember it like it was yesterday, because the then Barack Obama, now former President Barack Obama, started asking me in the most innocent kind of ways questions about where I grew up and et cetera. And I said to him, you know, I was born in Iran, and I lived there until I was 5, and then I moved to England for a year, and then back to Chicago. And then he started to describe his experience living in Indonesia. And where we bonded was this appreciation for the United States that you get if you have lived outside of the United States during formative years, liberties and freedoms that many of us who are always here may take for granted. But then we also talked about, yes, the United States is the greatest country on earth, but it's not the only country on earth. And you can learn from people outside of the country. And I told him about how I lived on a hospital compound. At that point, the United States had much better relationships with Iran than they do now, notwithstanding what you might hear about me in the blogs. So we had very good diplomatic relations, and the Shah of the country was using his platform to try to improve the healthcare in Iran. And so he was recruiting through his Department of Health physicians from all across the world to come and help start hospitals in some of the provinces that didn't have good health care. And so my dad went and helped start the Namazi Hospital in Shiraz. I was the second baby born in that hospital, so we tested it out on somebody else before I was born. But we talked about the fact that I played with children from all over the world on this hospital compound, and I learned to speak Farsi and a little bit of French and English, and sometimes all in the same sentence. But we did know how to communicate with one another, and we went anticipating to find something in common as opposed to differences. And I say this to you because I think that was where I realized, and I remember saying to him, you're one of the first people that actually gets how I was raised, and it informed not only my relationship with him, but both of our perspective on foreign policy and how the United States fits into the world, and how diplomacy can be a very effective tool for communication and for solving some of the big problems that we have. So it was a very important dinner, and I think it began a lifelong friendship. And so I'm really glad I said yes. So one of the lessons is, when some complete stranger invites you to dinner because you're trying to hire his spouse, say yes.
So, Valerie, I'd like to talk just for a minute about your incredible family. You come from a family of great accomplishment. Your mom, who is here today, Dr. Barbara Bowman.
Hi, Mom.
A shout out for Dr. Bowman. As everyone knows, she's an icon in early childhood development. You also have a renowned father, Dr. James Bowman, renowned pathologist, first African-American to receive tenure in the biological sciences at University of Chicago. You have a great-grandfather who was the first African-American admitted to MIT, and we don't have enough time to go into many of your other family members. So my question is, coming from a family of great accomplishment, did you feel an extra burden or pressure to be successful?
It's a good question. I would use a different word. I would say that my parents taught me to feel a responsibility, to work hard. In fact, it's okay. My mother used to always say, if you have to work twice as hard, what, you're going to learn something more? What difference does it make? Work twice as hard. And just stay true to your values and your moral compass, and do something that you care passionately about, and that it's okay to change your mind. And I was very fortunate to have two parents who loved each other dearly. My mother has always worked. She's 88. She still works full time. I can't believe she got out of work to come here today. But what they gave me was unconditional love, an enormous amount of support, and a sense of just go out there and try, take risks, and what's the worst thing that's going to happen if you stumble or you fall or you fail? We're going to be there and provide a safety net to pick you back up. And so it gave me this sense of motivation. And then they were really living examples of people who decided to pursue careers that involved teaching and giving back to the community. And so I think it was never a burden. It was really more a sense of what the infinite possibilities could be for me, because I was so fortunate to be born in that family.
I think one of the messages for all of us is that particularly those of you who have children, is they really do pay attention to what you do, whether you realize it or not. And you, of course, have this incredibly accomplished and talented daughter as well, who's really already at the point where, as young as she is, she's really a role model.
Well, my daughter did exactly what I did. Now, first of all, she did not follow my advice. She went to a law firm right after law school. And I said, why would you do that? And she said, Mom, I really think this is going to be a good experience. And I said, okay. And at 6 years, which was exactly when I hit the wall, she came and she said, I think I need to try something different. I'm like, no kidding. Sorry to all the lawyers who were past their 6th year out there. But I said, look, find something that you care passionately about. And she took this enormous risk, and she started interviewing in the media. And now she is the justice correspondent for CNN. And most importantly, she moved to Washington. So that's kind of nice having her close. But I'm really proud of the fact that she was also willing to take a chance and recognize that where there are many people who might have been thriving in the private practice of law, including some of you in this room, but that wasn't what was magic for her. And find your own magic.
Well, so when I think about the pivotal moments of your career, and as I think everyone knows, you started at that law firm, then you went to city government, you then were in both doing at the highest level corporate work, not-for-profit work, and then the White House. And we have a lot of women here today of various seniority and ages, a bunch of millennials, and I'm wondering if there's particular advice you can share about your career that would be helpful to the women here today.
Well, I think I'm going to write a book on this subject, so you can buy my book in a couple years, maybe, where I could tell you all of the lessons, many of which I learned the hard way. But I will tell you a story which illustrates an important lesson. I had, when I finished college, a 10-year plan. And I was going to go right to law school, and my mother encouraged me to do that. In fact, she said, the only thing that you're prepared for after college is to sell girdles in the basement of Marshall Fields. Where she came up with that, I don't know. But I didn't want to do that. So she said, I suggest you go on to some sort of graduate school. Didn't care what, but just keep going, keep going. So all right, my plan was to go to law school, and then I was going to join a law firm because that was kind of the path of least resistance. They all came up and interviewed at my law school, and they took you out to dinner, and they give you flybacks for people who know what that is, and they wine and dine you. So do that, and then hopefully get married, fall madly in love before, say, 25, 26, so that I could have a child by 30, because that was the magic number, right, when we were coming on. So, all right, 10 years into my plan, I'd gone right to law school, I'd come back, I joined a firm. I found a firm I liked even better, so now I'm on my second firm. I married literally, oh, well, figuratively, but almost literally the boy next door. He grew up with my mother. His grandmother grew up with my grandmother. My mother and he lived in the same apartment. His parents lived in the same apartment building. What could go wrong, right? Lots could go wrong. I had my daughter at just shy of 29. And so at age maybe 32, I'm sitting on the 79th floor of the Sears Tower. They called it that then. I don't think it's that anymore. But anyway, back then it was the Sears Tower. Beautiful office, looking out at Lake Michigan. Just returned from maternity leave a couple years earlier. And I would sit in that office and cry. I would close the door because no crying in baseball, no crying in the office. But I was miserable, and I thought, whose life is this? It can't be my life. And let me tell you, I wasn't really good at my job either. And I would be reading the credit report as opposed to the loan documents, and I'd be wondering what the developer was going to use for materials instead of negotiating, what do you do in the event of a casualty? Ugh, all those provisions. I start to shake just thinking about it. But I was on this path, and I thought it would be a failure to get divorced. Here, my parents were married 62 years before my dad died. I thought it would be a failure to not become a partner in a law firm. And I had a very good friend who said to me, what is wrong with you? Why don't you try something else? And it had just never occurred to me, but I did have a mentor at Sun & Shine, the firm I was with, Jean Allard, who some of you may still remember, an amazing icon in the city. And she said, why don't you participate in this program, Leadership Greater Chicago? And it exposed me to the city, the civic life, the political life. I'm sure at that time I didn't even know who my alderman was, let alone anything else. And then I had a friend who said to me, why don't you join the administration of Harold Washington? If you don't like it, you can always leave. You can always go back to that law firm, but I think you will. And I will say to you, I walked into my office the first day in City Hall, and I thought it was an office. Their definition of office is different. It was a cubicle, but as my boss said to me, but you have a window view, and the window faced an alley. And that was coveted. It was coveted. But really, to tell you the truth, the first day I walked in there, I felt like I'm a part of something bigger than myself, more important than myself, and I felt like I was home. And so one of my encouragements to everybody here is to, at some point in your career, try public service. And it doesn't have to be serving full-time in government. It could be serving on a school board or the park district or your neighborhood Boys and Girls Club, but you do get a certain satisfaction out about being a part of something bigger, particularly if you love your home and you love your city. Do something to try to make it a little better.
Are there other things that you learned at City Hall, and this is something you and I have talked about over the years, that you were able to use in good stead when you got to the White House?
Yes. Well, working with the Chicago City Council was very helpful. Well, I mean, seriously, it was, because part of what you do, and Susan, you will remember this from our time in government, is that you have to listen to a lot of different people and you have to try to build consensus. And it's actually one of my biggest disappointments from our time in Washington is that we met an opposition that considered compromise a dirty word. And in this big, complicated city or country, you've got to find that middle ground, and everybody has to give a little bit. And I think we learned a lot about giving a little bit. And the other thing I would say that I learned working for Mayor Daley, and actually Susan and I learned this lesson on the same day, was it's really important to work in an environment where you can thrive not just professionally but personally. And Susan and I were sitting in the mayor's office not long after he'd appointed me to be the planning commissioner, not long after Susan became corporation counsel, and I think it's safe to say he was somewhat terrifying. I don't think he would mind if I said that. We were very intimidated by him, and we were in his back conference room, where coveted place to be, and he's talking on and on about something I'm sure was really important, and Susan and I were paying no attention. None. And we were opposite each other, and we're looking at each other with our eyes getting bigger and bigger, and I'm starting to look at my watch like this. So he catches me. And I saw him catch me, and he said, well, so is there something more important that you two want to do other than being here with me? And really, we looked at each other, and I think if Susan hadn't been there, I don't know that I would have had the courage to say.
But you were the brave one.
I said, the Halloween parade starts in 20 minutes. We are 25 minutes away. And he looked at us, and we were holding our breath. We had no idea what he might say. Off with your head, something, I don't know. And he said, then what are you doing here? Get out of my office and get down to that parade. And I am telling you, we felt this relief, and we go flying down Lakeshore Drive. Our children were in the same second grade class, and we get to the school just literally as the door opens to Blaine Hall, and they come out in their little costumes looking through the crowd. And all I could think about is, what if we weren't there? And we were both single moms, so if we weren't there, no one was going to be there. And it was really important that we showed up. And the thing about the mayor, and I say this all the time, is that he understood the value of family, as did Maggie Daley, his wife. And Maggie said to me once when I said I couldn't do something, she said, why? And I said, I'm going to the office. And she said, it's Sunday. And I said, yeah, I know, but I'm going to the office. And she goes, my husband doesn't work on Sunday. Why are you working on Sunday? She said, Sunday should be your time for your family. And to have the people who, are in charge of your life have that attitude about family helped us very much in the White House, because, as you know from having worked there, both President Obama and Mrs. Obama were determined, even in this high-powered environment, to send messages and build a culture where people understood that family is important, value it, and not just talk the talk, but walk the walk.
I'll just add a side note about Mayor Daley, and that is that we all knew that the perfect excuse for not being somewhere was parent-teacher conference.
Worked like a charm.
It was sacrosanct. But I will also
Code of silence, right?
Right? I will also tell you, as someone at that time who was running an office of 250 lawyers or so, it impacted me. I know it did you as well, in that we felt more open about talking about our lives to the people who worked for us and trying to make it more family-friendly to them, which leads me to my next question, which is something that is discussed in Lean In and Anne-Marie Slaughter's book, and you and I have discussed it over the years, and that is this: can women have it all?
It's a very good question. So my position on this is evolving as I get older. I think I initially thought yes, but not all at the same time. And that your life is a marathon, and you will compartmentalize different parts of your life. And so, for example, when Susan and I worked at the city and our children were so young, it was important that we had a lot of flexibility. And we worked hard, but we also had the ability to meet our responsibilities. Different parts of your life, I think you have to do an assessment as to what does having it all actually mean to you, and to recognize that you're going to make trade-offs and that there are going to have to be some sacrifices along the way. And so I tell particularly the younger generation, don't set your definition of having it all too high, because as a single mom, even with parents who were incredibly supportive, my dad took my daughter to school every day of her life till she graduated from high school, picked her up and took her. My mom was always available. I had steady and consistent daycare. I know you will agree, we felt like we were holding on by our fingertips,
Absolutely.
even in the most supportive environment. And so I say, be realistic about what having it all means, and don't set yourself up to fail. And I remember thinking, when I was trying to carry my daughter on my hip and open the door with groceries, and it kept closing, and a guy came by and he said, "Could I hold the door for you?" And I'm like, "No, no, I've got this." Well, you know what? You don't. And so, but I took pride in saying, I can do everything myself. And so I really say to you, to the younger people, don't set yourself up to fail. And then the other way I look at it is at each stage of your life, you should try to be a whole person. And so even while working in the highest office in the White House, I still would try to work out every day until my back went out on me, but I still would try to have exercise. I would have lunch with a same group of friends every Sunday. You need some, it's not balance necessarily, because there was no balance really in my life when I was in the White House. I worked every single day, but I did have kernels in my life that made me feel grounded, that reminded me of who I was, that friends who didn't give a darn where I worked, they just were my friends and took an interest in me and asked me not what did you do today, but how is Laura? And that is what gives you the sustenance I think you need to make it over the long haul. So I haven't quite coined the phrase yet. I will by the time I finish my book. But you do have to pace yourself. You have to be realistic about your expectations. You have to be willing to ask for help, and it's okay to ask for help. And you have to recognize that you're going to make decisions and try to make them informed, but that do have repercussions down the line. But the other part of it is that life should be an adventure, and it's okay to, zig and zag. And I think that the world is much more accepting of those zigs and zags today than it was when we were starting out with our zigs and zags. There were people who thought I had lost my mind, some very close people to me when I went to work for the city. But if I hadn't gone and taken that leap of faith, I wouldn't be here with you today. So zig and zag.
I think it's true for both of us that when you think of how fortunate we've been in our careers, none of it would have happened had we not taken that leap and gone to work at City Hall. And I have to tell you, in those days, it was not considered a normal thing to do. Huge pay cuts and some risk involved, but worth every moment of it. So let's switch gears, and can you tell us a story that maybe a lot of people don't know about involving you and the Obamas?
Oh, how much trouble could I get in here? Let's see. Well, some of you may have heard that I considered throwing my hat in the ring to be the U.S. Senator when President Obama became president. Any of you might have heard that story? Yeah, a little bit. Oh, we don't have to clap, just. So I did think about it, and in fact, my family and my closest friends, including somebody on this stage, thought that I should throw my hat in the ring. And the reason why was because they said, you'll be a U.S. Senator, you'll be a principal, you'll make your own decisions, you can advocate for whatever you wish to advocate for, and if you go to the White House, you're going to be a staff person. And that's a very different role. And so at this stage of your life, don't you want to be the principal? And so I did give it a lot of thought, and I talked about it with both the President and First Lady at that point, President and First Lady-elect. And the First Lady had very clear feelings on the subject. She said, come with us. He was a little bit more, had a little bit more finesse, and he's like, well, okay, if you want to do that, go do some polling, go do this, we'll think about it over time. And then eventually the two of them talked, and he came back and he said, I've thought about it, and I think you need to do that. And come with us. And he said, I know you, and I know the US Senate, because I spent time there, and I think that you will feel a part of something very important if you join this White House. And you're going to have a portfolio where you can continue to advocate for the things that you care most about, whether it's equality for women or civil rights and reform of the criminal justice system, or advocating for people who need strong advocates in this location. And so why wouldn't you want to do that? And so I did. And I will tell you, he was very right. And for a whole host of reasons, I'm glad I didn't put my name in the hat for the Senate seat.
And I was wrong.
And Susan was wrong.
I admit it. Let's talk about the White House for a minute. As we all know, you're a very, very close friend of both the Obamas, and you also were the senior advisor to the president. Do you think that gave you an unfair advantage?
Well, I think you have to look at what's your purpose in being there. And the purpose is to further his agenda which I shared. And I think the answer, Susan, is I think being a close friend made me a better senior advisor. And I think being a senior advisor made me a better friend. And you will know, because you were obviously also close friends with the First Lady before all of this happened. And part of, well, tone starts at the top. And what was important to President Obama was to have a team. And yes, he's the leader of the team, but his expectation is that we would work together and that we would think things through, that we would seek the best experts in the world to advise us before we came to him, and then we would come to him having gone through a thorough and engaging process and then engage with him. And what was not okay with him and what would have not served his purpose would have been, for example, if after the team had come to a consensus, I then went around the team and said, but I really think this. That would not have been being a team player. And so I think in the end, over the arc of the 8 years, what our team appreciated was how important it was for us to really trust each other, work together, and present him our united front. Now, our team didn't always agree, but when we didn't, we would go in to him, usually preceded with a memo saying, Valerie thinks this, and so thinks that, and so thinks this, and we were unable to reach consensus. But 99 times out of 100, because we prided ourselves in thinking things through, we did. Now, sometimes we reached consensus and he disagreed with us, which he's free to do. He was the boss. But I think being able to know him and know what his values are, and having seen him over the 26 years now that I've known him, gave me an insight that made me a more effective member of the team. And I think that when we'd had a really, really tumultuous, tough day at the office, to be able to have dinner with he and his wife and their children and know what he was going through actually made me able to be a better friend as well. And I think my advice to you on this is that relationships are the most important thing in the world. Obviously, family first, but the people with whom you work, you spend so much time with that if you don't develop and take the time to get to know them, then you're not going to be as productive as you might otherwise. And back to the kind of way that you create a culture in an institution, I mean, I really tried very hard with my team to know their family, know their children, know if they had a sick parent, so that if they walk into a meeting and I see something's off, I have a frame of reference with which to interact with them. And it takes time and it takes energy, and I know you're all busy, but your team will only be as good as your effort to invest in them. And to the younger people, you have to speak up. You have to become a member of the team. You have to advocate not just for your positions, which is part of what our responsibility in the White House was, but you also have to advocate for yourself. And so I'll tell a quick story, which Susan knows very well, and it's something I learned really the hard way, and it combines the importance of mentorship. When I was in the city as a lawyer, I had a mentor who worked in the mayor's office, and she was my principal client. And she said to me, look, you know, you're doing work that's far senior to your position, because I didn't basically have a position. And so she said, you should go ask for promotion. And I said, are you kidding me? I would never ask for a promotion. How many people in this room have asked for promotion? All right.
Well, listen, everyone.
Well, it took about 3 months of her constant badgering me before I would even consider it. And this is part of not just being a mentor, but she was an advocate. She was not going to let it go. And she said, not only should you get a promotion, but you should be promoted over the person to whom you report. And I'm like, that's unheard of. Don't be ridiculous. That doesn't even make any sense. And she said, no, trust me. And she just and got to the point where I didn't want to see her, because he was like, have you gone in? And so my boss at the time was a guy named Judd Miner, and he was a friend, which actually made it harder. And so finally, I go in there, and I've got my notes for all the reasons why I deserve this promotion. I said, Judd, I think I should be a deputy, and I've been doing all this complex work and blah, 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 blah. And then I held my breath, and I remember he looked at me over his glasses, and he said, okay. And then I said, and I think I should move into the office up in the front where you have the suite of 3 offices, which ended up being next to Susan, because you don't have any women up there. And he said, Valerie, there's a long line of deputies far senior to you. And I said, well, I'll just move in until you pick who you want to go. Well, of course, I never moved out. Why would you move out once you moved in? But I say this because I would never have dreamed of asking for a promotion if Lucille had not badgered me to death. And you have to do it. You can't expect that your boss is sitting there thinking about you. He's thinking about other things. And I know that as I have become a boss, people have come to me, and I always smile when they do, and I try to look over my glasses just like he did. But the worst thing that would have happened is he would have said no. And then I would have said why, and hopefully he would have given me some constructive feedback, and then I could go back in 6 months and ask for it again. And so I think these are the kinds of lessons that I learned early as a result of having a good mentor and having a boss that said yes. Glad he said yes.
Before we open it up to the questions from the audience, so you had an incredible variety of experiences at the White House. What was the most memorable day, if there is one?
We had a lot of memorable days, some bad days, like Sandy Hook, which was just unbelievably horrible. And we had some really good days, like when ACA passed. That was a good day. But I think the most memorable, right? Thank you. Every day it's still the law of the land is a good day. It's a good day. But I think probably the most extraordinary day was a day where I was sitting in Dennis McDonough's office, who was the chief of staff, and it was during the end of the session when the Supreme Court rules on matters that are before them. That was when there were 9 justices, back before we didn't have a vacancy that was unable to be filled. I digress for a second. All right, so back on track. So I'm in Dennis's office, and we try to predict when the Supreme Court is going to rule on a variety of cases, and we had a bunch up, and we had decided, because the Supreme Court had ruled for the second time that the Affordable Care Act was constitutional the day before, that probably nothing would come up this day. And so I'm in his office, and my assistant rushes in with a note, and it says, marriage equality decision, 5-4, we won. Amazing. So I go running out of my Dennis's office, and I go running down to the Oval Office. It's 10:03 in the morning, and the president's not there. He's always there by 10:03 in the morning. And so I go back dejected to Dennis's office, and he said, well, what happened? And I said, he wasn't there. He's like, well, did you call him? I'm like, okay, I guess I could pick up the phone. So I call the president, and this is just an extraordinary moment. I mean, the arc of the moral universe is bending towards justice. And so he answers the phone, and he goes, what? Because this is the story of my life. So what do you want? Well, I'm sure the White House operator had said, Valerie Jarrett's on the phone, and he's thinking, I'm upstairs. Why is she calling me? I'll be down in a minute. Well, it turns out he was upstairs writing the eulogy for Reverend Pinckney, because that day we were going to Charleston for Reverend Pinckney's funeral. And so I respond to what, which was a little off-putting, by, the marriage equality decision came down today, 5-4. Long pause. Who won? We did. So he said, it's a good week, I'll be right down. So he comes down, he's calling the plaintiffs on the marriage equality case, he's still working on his eulogy, he has to now write remarks to go out to the Rose Garden and talk about marriage equality. All of that is happening. Then we get on a helicopter and we go to Charleston, and on the plane, he says to the First Lady and to me, I think I'm going to sing, I just want to brace you all. Well, I had learned this lesson earlier because we were in New York several years earlier, and Al Green had performed at a fundraiser, and backstage the electricians were saying to him, you should go out there and sing, Mr. President. And I'm like, don't you dare sing. And they're like, oh, come on, you'll be great. And I'm like, don't do it, it's gonna be the end of your career. So of course he goes out and he sings, and everybody, it breaks the internet that President Obama is singing Al Green. So I learned my lesson. So this time when he said he was gonna sing, I'm like, that's great, that's just great. Whatever you say. And he says, I'm gonna sing Amazing Grace. And he said, well, I'll see how I feel when I get there. And this service, which again, we've been to so many memorial services, and each one of them is gut-wrenching. And whether it's 26 people at Sandy Hook, or I accompanied the First Lady here to the funeral of Hydea Pendleton right after the second inauguration, and this incredible 15-year-old had marched in a band at the president's inauguration. And so whether it's 26 or 1, they are all devastating. And so we were dreading it. And we get there, and it is a celebration of life. And the congregation was alive. And when he stood up to give his remarks, you could feel the energy. And when it got to the point where he was going to, where Amazing Grace came in, he paused. And I wondered whether he was thinking about whether or not to sing or not. And he said to me later, no, I knew I was going to sing. I just wondered how quickly would it be before everybody joined in. And he got out about 5 words, and the entire congregation gets up. And so then the day is not over. We come back to the White House, and a junior person on my staff had come in my office about 3 weeks earlier and had said, I have a crazy idea. You're not going to like it. You're going to tell me it's impossible. I'm sure it's not, it doesn't make any sense at all. And I'm leaning in like, what's your idea? I can't wait to hear. And so she said, I think if we win the marriage equality case, could we light the White House in the rainbow of the LGBT flag? I said, that's a great idea. I have no idea if it's possible. And so I called Tina Chin, who succeeded Susan as the First Lady's Chief of Staff, who's in charge of the House, among many other things, and we figured out how to do it. And so that evening, on the north portico of the White House, Tina and many of the White House staff who had poured out to listen to the president give remarks in the Rose Garden, and many others who'd worked on marriage equality for years. And I pause to say to you, when President Obama took office, marriage equality was only legal in 2 states. 2 states, and before the Supreme Court ruled, it was 37 states in the District of Columbia. So we had moved a great deal. But that night, to stand outside and see thousands of people congregate and look at the White House in a shade that had never been seen before, and that will remain iconic of a key accomplishment of President Obama and so many thousands and thousands of people who work for decades across our country, that was an extraordinary day.
So on that high note, I have to ask you, without getting overly political, how does it feel to see so much of the work that you did, that the president did, that the administration did on so many areas, and the current attempts to dismantle them? What does that feel like?
Feels pretty badly. And again, it's not about us. It's really about the people who we were there in service of. And so if you take ACA, for example, I've met so many people across the country who wouldn't be here today were it not for ACA. I've met people who lost loved ones because they didn't have health insurance. And so when you see up close what it means to people's lives to not have to worry about their child if the child has a pre-existing condition, or not have to worry about hitting a lifetime cap, or whether their children who've come home from school and don't have jobs can stay on their plans until they're 26. So it's disheartening to see the attempts to dismantle it, as well as what's happening around climate change. And I have really not met a credible scientist who doesn't believe in climate change. It's just, it's fact. And so to not believe in it and to think that those important regulations that were put in place don't serve an important public purpose is disheartening. But I am optimistic, and I will say this to you, notwithstanding, I think the word that I used was gut-wrenching right after the election, or soul-crushing, or something along those lines, or a combination thereof, is that there's still so many people around our country who are doing incredible work, and it is that energy and that power and that willingness to participate in civic engagement that gives me confidence about the future. And one of the lessons that I learned from President Obama early on was to take the long view. I can remember trying to talk him out of running for Senate. That was a bad piece of advice I gave him. And he said, look, if I'm not afraid of losing, then you shouldn't either. And I think if I do this, then I can really have potential down the line, and you have to be willing to take risks but not lose sight of that long view. And I think that what I try to do right now is hold on to that long view. And it's been so heartening to see people come out and demonstrate, not necessarily always about what's in their individual benefits them as an individual, but what they think benefits us as a society. I was just heartened after the travel ban to see lawyers sitting on the floor at JFK volunteering to come and help people. And so there is that amazing spirit in our country, and I try to bottle it and hold it close to me for the dark days.
Thank you, audience. This is my favorite question. What have you learned from Laura Jarrett, her daughter?
My daughter. Well, as I alluded to earlier, Laura, well, she's my inspiration in life. And I think if I hadn't had Laura, I probably wouldn't have had the courage to take that leap of faith and find something to do that I hoped would make her proud one day. And so she started out by just inspiring me with her birth. But Laura is much more outgoing than I am. And it may be hard to believe this, but I'm actually very shy. Why are you laughing? I'm truly quite shy. My mom will vouch to it. And I've had to become more extroverted because I keep having these jobs that require me to do public speaking. But it was hard for me. I really had to overcome this shyness. And when Laura was young, I would walk in the elevator with her and she'd go, "Hi, what's your name? I'm Laura Jarrett." And I would go, "Oh my gosh, I would never have done anything like that as an adult." And so she really, in fact, my mom will remember this. We were at a dinner party once and I was talking to my mother and she said, "You must turn to the other side of you and talk to the person next to you." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Because you might learn something interesting." But I was just truly shy. And so one of the many things that Laura has done has helped me become more extroverted and to take the chance. And so you say something silly and people laugh at you, well, that's okay. Or you stumble and fall. Susan and I both had wardrobe malfunctions, which hopefully you won't notice when we leave the stage. Don't look. But we were laughing about it, and there's a time when that's the kind of thing which probably would have, discombobulated us. And my daughter has always been much more kind of easy-go-lucky and a freer spirit and willing to take chances, and she's added adventure to my life.
How do you advise men on supporting and retaining female talent?
Do better. Oh, the men, the men, the men. So,
and there are some here.
There are some good men. Susan mentioned them at the beginning. We're glad you're here. So listen carefully. Well, the fact that you're here, you probably don't need this advice. But I think one of the reasons I think President Obama has always been so sensitive to these issues is that he was raised by a single mother. He lived with his grandparents for a while, and his grandmother had a high school education but was very bright and trained men who then leapfrogged over her at the bank. He's married to this incredible woman who he remembers when he would be down in Springfield and Sasha or Malia would be sick and she'd call up and say, "What are you going to do about this?" And he's like, "I'm in Springfield." She goes, "I don't care. What are you going to do about this?" So he knows the challenges, and then he's got these two amazing daughters who he wants to see compete on a even playing field. So I think tone does start at the top, and I think that it's important for men to not only have programs on their books that support working families, and I will say to you, we are the only developed country that doesn't have a paid leave policy. We should have a paid leave policy in our country. We should have workplace flexibility. We should have affordable childcare. We should have equal pay for equal work, and we should have paid sick days. These are the basket of things, right? And these are not women's issues anymore. These are working family priorities. And employers who get this and who invest in their workers not only attract the best talent, but they retain the best talent. And we can no longer afford to leave half of our talent on the sideline. And so I think part of what I encourage men to do is, yes, it's important to have those policies, but you also have to live them yourself because everybody's watching. And so a good example would be for us when Josh Earnest, who was the president's press secretary, took the full maternity leave. We have 3 months paid maternity leave in the White House for men and women. Shouldn't be a difference, should have both maternity and paternity. And then he didn't travel with the president for a while overnight. Now the press secretary travels everywhere with the president. He said, I want to be home with my baby. That sent a signal throughout the organization. And you have to be deliberate about it. I had one of my top performers come in and say to me, I just want to tell you that I'm going to start to think about leaving the White House. This was a few years ago. And I said, why? And she said, well, I want to have a baby. And I said, so why do you want to leave the White House? And she said, well, I don't think I can do both. I said, we will work it out. And every single day when she would come in the morning, I would take her temperature after she came back from her 3 months of maternity leave. And I'd say, how are we doing? How's Philip? Is it working for you? And so part of my advice, and this isn't just to men, Susan, it's to women in positions of authority as well, is that you have to not just give permission, but you have to reinforce it. And if you do that, then your employees will be whole and they will be more productive. And increasingly, evidence is showing that in the private sector, when you initiate and put in place these kinds of priorities and investments, that you have a more productive workforce, a more loyal workforce, a more efficient workforce, less turnover, and ultimately in the private sector, more profitable. And so the argument I make is that don't do it just because it's the right thing to do it because it's good for business. That usually gets the men's attention. Good for business.
So my final question, which is really two questions, is first, what was the first thing you did after you left the White House? And then related to that, what's next on the horizon for you? You said that you're writing a book, which is going to be great. I'm sure there's a lot of advice you have to give, but what else is on the horizon for you?
Well, the first thing I did was sleep. And I really thought, let's just see how long I can sleep. And unfortunately, I seem to have hit a wall at about 6 hours. I'm working my way up to 8 or 10, but right now but 6 uninterrupted, blissful hours without checking my iPhone. So I did get some much needed rest. And so right now I have a portfolio of interests. That's the new buzzword I think I'm going to use, as opposed to saying I'm unemployed. Sounds better. Or self-employed. As the case may be, self-employed. So I am on the lecture circuit, and I'm doing a combination of paid speeches and pro bono ones. A speech last week to the Innocence Project was pro bono, an amazing group of people with whom I met. And so I'm going to do a lot of speaking around the country. I hope to join a few boards. I just joined the board of Ariel Capital last week, which was exciting. John Rogers, a lifelong friend. He and Melody I have known forever. And my dad was one of his first investors and served on his board the entire time from the inception of the creation of Ariel until my dad's death. So it's very special to join his board. And hopefully a few others. And then a book, and I'm going to help President and Mrs. Obama with their new Obama Center, which we're really glad is coming to Chicago, right?
Yes.
And I should pause for a second on that just because he'll kill me if I don't. I'll come back and I say I was here and I had all of you captive. It's going to be much more than just a library. The library is really the repository for his archives, and I think they're going to be not only historic, but provide an opportunity for people to go in and engage and understand the decision-making process, and all of that's very exciting. But I think what I find more exciting is a platform for solving some of the big problems that we still have before us. And they're both very young. I'm not as young, but we're all still kind of young. And so to be able to take their incredible talent and popularity and energy and commitment to still being a force for good and apply it to the city, our country, and the world from the south side of Chicago, but make it available, obviously, over a platform of the internet so that wherever you are, you can participate and be the place where you solve big problems. I think it's going to be a wonderful, exciting venture to take.
Valerie, thank you.
Thank you all.
We love you. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.